The Mayan Long Count didn't end on December 21st, 2012. It completed 13 back tons, one cycle, and the count continued. What the media never asked is what the preceding 5,125 years were measuring. The answer, when you trace the astronomy, is 1/5 of the precessional cycle, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that determines our position relative to the galactic plane. Multiple independent calendar systems, built on multiple continents by civilizations with demonstrated astronomical sophistication, appear to be tracking the same window, and that window is not 2012. It's the period we are now entering. Let me begin with what the Mayan Long Count calendar actually is. Stripped of the apocalyptic narrative that the 2012 media cycle attached to it, the Long Count is a counting system. It counts days from a specific start date, equivalent in most calculations to August 11th, 3114 BCE in the proleptic Gregorian calendar. It counts forward in units: 1 day, 20 days, 360 days, 7,200 days, 144,000 days. The largest unit, the Bakten, is 144,000 days, approximately 394 years. On December 21st, 2012, the count completed 13 Baktons. Not the end of the calendar, the completion of a cycle. The calendar continued. The world continued. What ended was a specific count of approximately 5,125 years. What began? That is the question that the 2012 media cycle never asked seriously, because asking it required understanding what the preceding count was measuring. The long count tracks something. All calendar systems track something. The question is, what the designers of the long count understood about the astronomical reality they were encoding. What phenomenon, what cycle, what measurable celestial event runs at approximately 5,125-year intervals? The precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's rotational axis that causes the position of the vernal equinox against the background of the stars to shift by approximately 1 degree every 72 years, completing a full cycle of 360 degrees in approximately 26,000 years. 1/5 of the precessional cycle is approximately 5,120 years, not the full precession, a significant subdivision of it. The kind of subdivision that a civilization with sophisticated astronomical knowledge would identify as a meaningful period, a subcycle with its own character, its own relationship to the longer precessional movement. The precession of the equinoxes is the long clock, the clock that runs over tens of thousands of years, marking the slow shift of the Earth's orientation relative to the galactic plane, relative to the star field, relative to the specific astrophysical environment in which the solar system sits. For most of recorded history, this clock was theoretical rather than practically significant for daily life. But for a civilization with the astronomical sophistication to build the instruments I've been describing across these investigations, the precession is the background context in which all shorter cycles operate. And the specific precessional position that the Earth occupies at any given time determines things about the planet's astrophysical environment that we are only beginning to understand at the level of mainstream science. What things? The galactic current sheet, the plane of maximum electromagnetic energy density in the galaxy, through which the solar system passes at specific precessional intervals. The evidence for the existence of this sheet and for the solar system's periodic transit through it, is in the astrophysical literature, though not yet in the mainstream public scientific communication. What the solar system's passage through regions of different galactic electromagnetic density does to conditions on Earth, to solar activity, to the Earth's own electromagnetic environment, to the biological and geological systems that operate within that environment, is a question that is actively being investigated by researchers at the frontier of plasma physics and astrophysics. I am not making specific claims about what will happen in the window around 2030. I am noting that several independent counting systems, built by civilizations whose astronomical sophistication I have been documenting throughout these investigations, appear to be tracking a specific window in the precessional cycle that corresponds to the period we are now entering. Not 2012 specifically, a broader window, centered on the late 2020s and extending into the early 2030s, in which several independently derived astronomical counts reach significant points in their cycles. Let me describe the secondary counts I mentioned at the outset. The Vedic astrological system operates with a cycle called the Yuga, a long count division of cosmic time that runs in a specific mathematical relationship to the precessional cycle. The subcycle of the Yuga, that the Vedic tradition identified as the current period, the Kali Yuga, has its endpoint calculations spread across a range of scholarly interpretations. But several significant recalculations of the Vedic count, using the original mathematical parameters without the adjustments made by later commentators, produce a terminal date in the window I'm describing. Not exactly 2030. The range of scholarly calculations extends from the early 21st century through the mid-21st century. But the center of that range is in the period we are now in. The Judaic jubilee count is a 50-year cycle in which, according to the Torah, debts are cancelled, slaves are freed, and property reverts to its original owner. The count runs from a specific anchor date that Judaic scholarship has debated for centuries. Several significant scholarly calculations of the Jubilee anchor, using the most consistent interpretation of the biblical chronology, produce a Jubilee year in the window of the late 2020. The Jubilee cycle is not astronomical in its stated origin, but the 50-year period, when you examine its mathematical relationship to other cycles, has specific astronomical correlates, including a relationship with the nodal cycle of the Moon and with specific configurations of the outer planets that recur at approximately 50-year intervals. The Central Asian astronomical tradition that I mentioned in the introduction is the least well-documented of the counting systems I'm describing, for reasons that will be obvious to anyone who has been following these investigations. The primary documentary record of this tradition was in the archives that burned. What survives is in secondary sources, in the accounts of travelers who encountered the tradition and described it with varying degrees of accuracy, and in the material record of the instruments built to track it. Those instruments, the multifunction astronomical clocks I discussed in an earlier investigation, encoded a count alongside their astronomical displays that has not been fully decoded because the tradition that built them is not available to provide the interpretation. What is visible in the surviving instruments, in the numerical sequences, encoded in their calendar wheels and their planetary displays, is a count that appears to be tracking something in a period that its mathematical extrapolation places in the first decades of the 21st century. What are all of these counts tracking toward? This is the honest position. I don't know exactly. What I know is that multiple independent traditions, built by civilizations of demonstrated astronomical sophistication on multiple continents, developed counting systems that converge on approximately the same period. The convergence is not a coincidence of independent prophecy. It is evidence of shared astronomical knowledge, knowledge of a long cycle whose significant moments these traditions were all tracking. The knowledge was encoded in calendar systems, because calendar systems are the appropriate vehicle for astronomical information that runs over thousands of years. You cannot put it in a book. Books don't last that long. You put it in a counting system, in a set of mathematical relationships that any civilization with basic numerical literacy can operate forward. That will survive the burning of the library because it survives in the counting itself rather than in any specific document. The civilizations that built these systems understood something about the period we are entering that they encoded for the benefit of whoever came after. The civilization that the maps called Tartaria was one of those civilizations. Its astronomical knowledge, encoded in the multifunction instruments I've been describing, tracked the same long cycle. And its counting system, whatever specific form it took, was tracking the same endpoint. The endpoint that the other traditions identify as now, as the period we are in, as the transition between the count that ended and whatever comes next. What comes next? The honest answer is that the counting systems tell you when, not what. They are clocks, not prophecies. They tell you that the long cycle is ending, that the precessional configuration is shifting, that the astrophysical environment in which the Earth has been operating for the past 5,000 years is changing. What that change means for human civilization, for the biological systems that have been calibrated to the environment of the past cycle, for the social and political structures that were built in the middle of the last count, is a question the ancient astronomers could not answer for us. They could only point at the clock and tell us to pay attention. We are paying attention. Some of us are. Others have been told that the clock is superstition, that the count is folklore, that the number it terminates on is just a number, and the world will look the same afterward as it does before. That is what was said in 2012. And in 2012 it was true, because 2012 was not the end of the count, just the completion of one back tomb. The count continued. And the count? In several traditions, built on several continents, by several civilizations of demonstrated astronomical sophistication, continues toward a window that we are now entering. The instruments are still running, the numbers are still counting, the ancient astronomers are still pointing. The question is not whether the count is accurate. The question is whether we are paying enough attention to ask what it was counting. If the Mayan Long Count, the Vedic Yuga cycle, the Judaic jubilee, and a Central Asian astronomical tradition, encoded in instruments we can no longer fully read, are all pointing at the same astronomical window, what did those civilizations understand about this period that we've been told is superstition? Leave your thoughts in the comments and share this with someone who thinks the ancient astronomers were pointing at something real.